Hey there, it's Mindy, and welcome to part 2 of my series on DIY tools for absolute beginners. In this video, we are talking about the miter saw, which is my favorite saw with a circular blade. And I like this one because it's stationary. I can control how the blade comes down, and I'm not worried so much about the danger of the blade. But let's talk more about the miter saw. So what is the miter saw used for? Well, it's for making miter cuts, which simply means cuts at an angle across the width of a board. So when you're cutting this way, you're going to cut across the board, either straight or at any angle that the saw will allow you to. So as far as DIY, you'll typically see this used for making repeated cuts for something like a box or a tray, or angled cuts for something like a frame, trim. The sky's the limit. I won't go into every single detail about all the parts and pieces of the miter saw. Definitely read through your manual, but there are a few main parts and terms that you'll come across with pretty much any saw. First, we have a switch trigger, which controls the start and stop, of course. This one has a hole where you can put a lock for safety. This is a blade guard. Do not be tempted to remove that because it is for safety as well. Your saw should have a dust collection bag because you don't want that dust going all over the place. And as well as a work clamp. This will clamp your piece of wood that you're going to cut the saw with to keep it in position. Now let's talk about the saw blade. Mine is 10 inches, and that refers to the diameter. So you'll see them as small as 7 1/4. I think maybe even smaller than that, up to 12 inches. Now this saw is a sliding saw. It comes forward, so it can cut up to 12 inches wide and up to 3.5 inches thick. So, and that's going to change with the angle. When you're doing an angle cut, it'll be shorter. Another important term to know about the blade itself is kerf, and that is the thickness of the blade itself. So the thickness of the blade will remove that much whenever you make a cut. So that's important when you're going to cut lengthwise. Say you're making repeated cuts, you don't want to go along and measure and make lines the exact length that you want in the end. You want to account for the blade kerf so that you'll get your equal pieces instead of some pieces being shorter than others. This part here, the back, is called the miter fence. And you'll see on the other side, there are some measurements that you can use to line up your cuts. And this part is the miter table. Now, very important to note is that these two parts need to be what's called square, which means the blade is perpendicular to both of those. So they need to both be in square to make accurate cuts. And your manual will tell you how to make those adjustments if necessary. Some saws may have a different locking mechanism, but if yours is like mine and you have this knob, this is a miter lock handle, and it's important to lock that whenever you change the position of the saw and lock it all the way down so that there's no wiggle room here, because that can affect your cut. That same rule applies if your saw has a bevel lock knob in the back. So if you're making a bevel cut, which is turned to the side, that needs to be locked down all the way. Now, like as with most power tools, some have different bells and whistles than others. This one is actually sliding, so that's why it can cut 12 inches with a 10-inch blade. And it has a laser guide. So when I turn on the laser guide, it creates a laser line on my piece where I'm going to cut, so I can see if it's accurate. So here's a quick recap on the miter saw. It is a stationary saw with a circular blade. It is great for making repeated cross cuts and accurate angled cuts. Whenever you are using a saw, always remember to wear hearing protection and eye protection, and look through that manual for all the safety instructions for any tool. Thanks for watching.